The rest of October will, the Adult Forum will be presenting a series of presenters on election-related issues. So October 11th and 18th, we will have Dr. Grace Chung from SDSU. Peter, do you want to say a word about what she'll be talking about?
Well, yeah, she's a professor of political science at San Diego State and a good friend of mine. I know her husband well, too, who teaches history at San Diego State. And we just asked her to speak on the election as a political scientist. So we were sort of interested as a formation committee in why in the American population right now there are two, we call them epistemologies. You know, you have more liberal voters who believe in reason and science and truth, and you have maybe more conservative voters, I'm trying not to be too stereotypical, who gravitate towards conspiracy theories and suspicion, things like that. So we were curious, Jeff and I at least, about why this is happening right now. And then I said, well, that's what we're interested in, but you can pretty much just address anything you want as a political scientist about the American electorate today, coming up to this election. So she was pretty willing to do that, and we'll sort of see, you know, but she's quite accomplished. She's very interested in human rights, and she might be addressing those issues as well. So, but it should be intriguing, and she'll be a good presenter, I'm sure.
Thank you, Peter. So that will be October 11th and 18th, the second and third Sundays in October. And finally in October, on October 25th, the League of Women Voters will be with us to present the propositions on the California ballot from a nonpartisan stand, explaining all the propositions on the ballot with us. So that'll be our forum series for October, and I hope you will join us as we move through our election season over the next few weeks. So again, a reminder that next week there will not be a forum, and we'll pick up again the week after. With that, I'll invite you to mute as we begin, unless you are speaking, and I will turn it over, I believe, to Diane to begin us with an opening prayer.
Jeff, before we get to that, you might want to put a plug in for updating the directory.
Sure, yeah, and if you haven't done so already, we've been running an ad in the Thursday e-news that this is the time of year we invite people to update your information in Realm, which is our online directory, so that we can connect with each other, especially important in this time of disconnection from church when we can't see each other in person. That's in your Thursday e-news, has been for the last few weeks. So if you haven't done that, I'll invite you to do that. Or if you need more help with that, be in touch with Bob Knight or myself. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jeff. And Marshall, let's begin with prayer. Take just a second to bring ourselves closer to our center. Almighty God, who created us in your image, grant us grace fearlessly to contend against evil and to make no peace with oppression, and that we may reverently use our freedom. Help us to employ it in the maintenance of justice in our communities and among the nations. Through your Holy Spirit, inspire and guide us to wisely discern the best use of our voices to bring about your kingdom on earth, to the glory of your holy name, and through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Thank you, Diane. Hello, everybody. Again, it's so good to see so many faces that I have missed for so long. So is everyone ready for just a rollicking good time talking about policy? Woohoo! It's you know, kind of right up there with watching paint dry. But it's important, and so let me do a little maintenance here. So let's dive right in. And I've got a slide presentation for us. So I've got to get down to my share screen. And hopefully this works. All right. Go away. Okay, here we go. So as Jeff was about to talk about what it is we are talking about today, it's a question of what I'll call endorsement. I'll get into more later, but all sorts of organizations are asked to participate in something, right? And so there needs to be a way that they decide whether they will or won't. And that's pretty much what we're talking about today. So let me change the slide. First question that is probably on everyone's mind is, why are we here? Why is this important? What are we doing, taking our time to talk about this issue? And so the first bullet there, you know, we have a name and a reputation and a heritage of long-standing that is worthy of protecting. I don't know if anyone would disagree with that. And so we need to be careful when we step forward that we're doing so in a mindful fashion. And so, like I said, you know, we want to be thoughtful. We want to be thoughtful in what we do. We want to be deliberative in what we do, as opposed to just knee-jerking our way through whatever the issues are. Increasingly during these times, religious organizations, churches, mosques, synagogues are being asked to get involved in a variety of issues. And the reason that we're talking about a policy this morning is because it helps organizations in their decision-making process. It gives structure to how you think about things. And so, talking about a policy, there are several components in a good policy that are important. As I said, it provides some sort of a structure. It provides some guidance in terms of how decision makers go through considering what they're going to do. So this is kind of a higher level issue about just good policy, but you'll see how it applies here. A good policy will speculate or specify that a certain number of variables, issues are considered. You know, that you should, you know, you need to think about these 3 things, or you need to think about these 5 things, whatever it happens to be. They also need, it provides guidance to decision makers to think about the consequences of a decision. You know, if we do X, can we expect Y or maybe even Z? And then the hardest part are those unintended consequences. You know, in biology, oftentimes some sort of species is introduced to an area in order to counteract another invasive species. You know, they feed off of the one, and then the new species that was introduced becomes a huge problem, an unintended consequence. So they thought they were going to be doing something good, but it had other consequences associated with it. And also, not most importantly, but very importantly, a good policy and a good process adds increased confidence from those who are looking on to feel comfortable that this has been well and truly thought through, and that the decision to do something is not just a willy-nilly, grr reaction. That should be gut. Anyway, it's important to remember and to recognize that a good policy and process does not necessarily guarantee a favorable outcome, but it significantly improves the probability or the chances of success. And so that's always important to keep in mind. Okay. in the last several months, the cathedral has been asked to support something. There were a couple of things, and I think Diane will speak to this a little later on. But in that process and in the consideration of these requests, it was discovered that, oh, gee, we really don't have anything on paper to help guide us through whether we want to participate in this or not. And chapter, I think rightfully said, you know, we need to have something in place. We need to develop something. So why we are here today is two things or multiple things. One is to share some of the history of the Episcopal Church, which Justin will be speaking to in just a moment. And also some recent history of the cathedral in dealing with social justice issues, to share with you a draft policy that has been developed within the Peace and Justice Committee, and then to get your thoughts on things that, you know, your reactions to this issue, your reactions to the particular policy that we have developed. And so that will happen at the end of our presentation when we have a Q&A session. So at this point, I'm going to turn this over to Justin, and I will stop my screen share for now. And Justin, you're going to share with us some of the history of the Episcopal Church in its various involvements over time.
Yes, good morning. That's the plan. So, you know, I think one of the things that we wanted to address in this is some of the kind of questions of, well, what about separation of church and state? Should the church be making endorsements or taking a position or taking a stand on issues? Isn't it just for, you know, communion and prayer? And the answer is really a resounding no. The Episcopal Church especially has had a long history of advocacy for peace and justice issues across the nation and across the world. My dad often joked that, you know, after they signed the Declaration of Independence, a couple Episcopalians went across the street and founded the Episcopal Church, or Anglicans went across the street and founded the Episcopal Church. So there is definitely a long history of how the church views itself and its role in advocacy for certain issues. Generally, a lot of big ticket issues are taken up to the General Convention level, which is our triennial convention of the entire Episcopal Church, encompassing representatives from everywhere across the diocese and all the bishops, to really figure out what positions nationally or globally are of importance to the Episcopal Church and warrant our advocacy. One sort of little comment that I'll share from their policy page says that the Catechism of the Book of Common Prayer tells us that the mission of the church is to restore all people to unity with God and each other in Christ, and that the church lives out this mission as it prays and worships, proclaims the gospel, and promotes justice, peace, and love. The pursuit of a world that more closely reflects God's dream for it, thy kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven, is central to basic Christian discipleship and the identity of all who are baptized. So that really is a call to arms to say that, you know, being an Episcopalian, being a faithful Christian is more than just going to church on Sunday. It's how we live out our lives in our daily lives, in our civic lives, in our community. And the church tries to give us some guidance about how those issues fall in line with our Christian values. The church over the years has discussed several issues ranging from racial reconciliation as evidence right now, which is call for the Sacred Ground workshops, which many of us are taking part in. The church has called for economic justice, even things that get very secular, like a Christian response to the 2016 election. You know, there was a lot of kind of consternation and people on both sides of the fence, but the church sort of found a way that we could respond to people's angst or anxiety or fervor or joy through a Christian lens, and sort of how to move forward over the next 4 years as Christians, as Episcopalians. There is a long history of social justice education from the church, both domestically and globally, and even things as mundane, not as mundane, but as practical as a response to gun violence. You know, and the Episcopal Church is very cognizant that, you know, our membership is broad and vast and wide, and that as Episcopalians, we may often fall on many different sides of an issue. But there is a way, sort of a common thread by which we can unite, which is through our faith. And the church's guidelines are not prescriptive in terms of saying what we should think, but rather how our thoughts and practices and actions can be informed by our faith. The church will never tell you what to do, but it might kind of give you some hints about how to do it as a good Christian or as a good Episcopalian. Another thing that has been an important part of this policy process is the idea of consistency. And by having a policy in place, you know, for the low-lying fruit, the easy stuff, you know, those decisions seem kind of common sense. Like, does a church to endorse, you know, a sports team? That might not be quite in our purview. But when it comes to policy or other things, the reason that we have a policy and we want to have a sound policy is so that moving forward, there are clear guidelines that can be followed for every type of decision that's made. So that when someone comes, well, why didn't you endorse my X? We can say, well, here's a process that every endorsement goes through. Here are the rubrics. Here are the touchstones that need to be present. And this is why we are able to endorse one issue, but not another, if in case that question ever comes up. So it really becomes a matter of consistency for the cathedral, as well as consistency with the values that have been ascribed by the larger church, by our diocese, by the bishop and the presiding bishop, as set forth as Episcopalians. So basically, sort of in a nutshell, there's a long history of advocacy. You know, peace and justice is a cornerstone of our lives as Episcopalians, and this policy will help us manage that responsibility dutifully, and as Marshall said, consistent with the history and the reputation of the cathedral and the church in our community.
Great, Justin. Thank you very much. So we'll go to Diane now. Let me turn my video back on just a second. Happy. So we'll go to Diane, and she is going to talk to us about some of the history of the cathedral itself in various things that we have thrown our support to or given our name to. So Diane, I also have your slides
And you know,
available.
Marshall, it'll probably be easier if for my screening if I just share what I have. Is that okay?
You don't want the slides?
I don't think so. Thank
Okay.
you, though. I appreciate it.
Very good.
Just a few of the things that St. Paul's Peace and Justice Committee has endorsed in the past, actually this past year. We endorsed a request from San Diegans for Gun Violence Prevention to express support for 2 gun violence prevention measures proposed in Sacramento by email ballot in April of this year. And we endorsed requests from Canon Ellen Clark King of Grace Cathedral for a statement by the cathedral deans in California to support rent and mortgage forbearance during the pandemic in June. There have been a number of other things that Peace and Justice has hosted or joined in on. which may or may not have required endorsement. So I guess that's what the process is going to help us with, to ascertain what should be passed through for endorsement. I don't want to take a lot of time because we want to leave plenty of time for discussion. But I will share that Marshall and I contacted 7 cathedrals with questions regarding how they make decisions to endorse social justice proposals, and I received 1 response. And after an internet search, I found relevant information on only 1 cathedral. So Grace Cathedral in San Francisco shared that there isn't a written policy outlining which issues the cathedral should or should not support. Invitations to sign Grace's names to letters or petitions are brought to chapter, and the decision is made there on a case-by-case basis. And if there are controversial decisions or need the approval of the dean and chapter, well, let's see. That's a little more complicated, I'm sorry. But if there's a controversial issue, the bishop and executive committee are also to be consulted. And I wasn't able to speak with anybody from St. Mark's Episcopal Cathedral in Minneapolis, but their website has a thorough and detailed procedure for decision-making and the approval of proposals. And let me go to that because hold on just a second, please. I've kind of consolidated that because it's quite a lengthy process, but a proposal is brought to an appropriate committee or commission. The chair of a committee or commission may appoint a subcommittee. A subcommittee researches issues and prepares a recommendation. Commission hears the report, discusses the issues, decides if the proposal is ready. Wardens or treasurer decide whether another committee or commission should review, or items that require funding shall be forwarded to the finance committee, and following their review, the reviewing committee chair sends the conclusion to the senior warden and chair of the originating committee or commission. So I'd say that what we're proposing is definitely in between those 2 possibilities. I think a little bit considerably more simplified than St. Mark's, and Justin will now share the proposal.
Thanks. First, there was a question from Lisa in the chat, which was, who defines what's controversial? And that's a great question, Lisa. I think that's why we have a policy, so that everything that comes forward will get the same treatment. And so it's not like, oh, this isn't controversial, we don't need to go to committee, we'll just approve it. Everything that comes across the desk will go through the process and will be treated fairly. I think that often some things which are more controversial might kind of seem, I wouldn't say obvious, but might be more tinderboxes. And often in those cases, the cathedral will most likely not be the first person to be looking at it. So there might be guidance from the diocese, there might be guidance from the national church that we would most likely follow. In the event that we would not follow either the diocese or the national church for some unforeseen reason, the reason why we have this policy is so that we can explicitly say why the national position on this issue is not consistent with how we see our community or something else, or how it might impact other people. But then again, that sort of is probably a dean and chapter issue if we were ever to part ways with how the larger church was looking at a specific issue. But that would kind of answer that. So there's no hierarchy, everything would go through the process. All right, I will take a moment to share this so that everyone can see it.
Justin, I have a slide ready to go if you want.
Okay. Well, I have it right here. But you can share the slide. That'd be great, and then I'll
Okay.
address it there.
So let me get to full screen here so it's easier to read.
Perfect.
There we are.
Okay, so request for cathedral endorsement or support. It's important that this is a draft and that this forum today is part of the vetting process to sort of hear from cathedral members, and then the ultimate kind of recommendations will go back to Dean Penny and chapter for approval. But this is part of the process of discernment so that people can kind of comment on and see if there might be issues that we just did not foresee. But here's how the proposal will read. The following are guidelines for proposals requesting that the cathedral endorse or publicly show support for an issue or event. Nothing in this process is intended to inhibit any individual clergy, staff, or member from expressing a personal commitment to a position. A request will describe generally the issue being presented, summarize any relevant positions of the Episcopal Church, describe any research that was collected and examined relevant to the specific issue and attach same. If funding is required, specify the amount and source, and as appropriate, include information on other individuals or organizations sought for endorsement. A request should first be sent to the relevant committee, whose recommendation will be presented to the dean and wardens as deemed appropriate by the dean and wardens. The request may be submitted to the chapter for consideration. The idea behind these sort of 5 bullet points is basically, again, to keep the process consistent so that the chapter, so that the cathedral and the dean and the wardens have the same kind of baseline of information for every proposal that comes forward. And, you know, generally give, as it says here, a general sense of history, an idea of if the Episcopal Church has already presented an opinion on the matter, and the description, the money, but also the last part, as I tell my first year students when they're trying to discern, you know, how to understand proposals and policies to vote on, if the language doesn't make sense, sometimes look to the other people who are endorsing it to kind of give you an idea of, you know, where the issue might fall. And that was another portion that we wanted to add, was that anyone who's seeking the cathedral's support or endorsement should also share the other institutions they are seeking for endorsement or support for an issue. That way it's kind of a quick sense of whom we would be keeping company with this support, as well as the other pertinent underlying issues that are being presented. So that's in a nutshell. I want to, you know, as Diane said, want to leave time open for conversation and for questions to our committee. I know Dean Penny is online. If there are questions that she or Jeff might want to address as well.
Justin, if I could jump in right quick. In our discussions, I think you made a very good statement about this number 5 item about who else is being endorsed. I can't remember exactly your wording. If you remember, could you say that again?
Right. So with item 5, the issue is not, we don't want the presenter to provide everyone who else is, every other entity that is endorsing this issue or matter. Simply whom else they are requesting for endorsement. So if they're coming to us and we're kind of on a long list or a short list of other entities that they are seeking for endorsement, that is pertinent information to us so that the people can know who else is being endorsed or who else is endorsing this issue. Right. Is that the clarification, Marshall? Well,
and the other thing is that not that we would base our decision on that. We don't intend to be a sheep following the crowd. Right. But it is helpful to know, you know, what the population right. Of involvement is. So just wanted to make that point.
Correct.
And I've got another slide here that I'm going to throw up that just talks about kind of the flow of a issue. So it comes in either from an external source, the San Diego for gun prevention, gun violence prevention, or some internal source. There could be, I don't have a good example of internal, but it's theoretically possible. So the notion is that the relevant committee, this will primarily be a peace and justice kind of issue. But we have other committees within the cathedral, Simpler Living, who may want to endorse something about nature care or something of that nature that would fall outside the general purview of the Peace and Justice Committee. So the relevant committee takes it under consideration in whatever form that they would choose, whether it's a subcommittee or a committee as a whole. And they would talk about a couple of things here. I've got a few bullet points here, but the 5 items that we just talked about are the paramount. The nature of the quest, the time, so the nature, is it simply putting our name to something? Do we want people to show up? Do we want to write a check? What is the nature of the request? The timing. We wanted this to be as nimble as possible. Some of these issues are explosive in terms of their timing. Something happens on Tuesday and we want to be making a statement on Wednesday. I was thinking of the St. Mark's process. Oh my gosh, it would take some time to work through all the levels that they have prescribed. And we wanted to ensure some agility and some nimbleness in this. So the relevant committee considers all these issues. They make a proposal to the dean and wardens. Yes, we should do this. This is the history. Again, the 5 items that we've just talked about. The deans and wardens consider that, and this is where we trust in their judgment and position to determine, is this something that needs further consideration by chapter, or do they feel comfortable in making the decision themselves? So somewhat off my screen, I don't know if you can see this. Let me see if I can adjust this. How am I going to do this? There. So a decision is made, again, either by the dean and wardens themselves, or if it's referred to chapter makes the decision. And then the, what is the, again, back to the endorsement with the nature of the request, is it simply a signature? Do we need to craft a statement, to insert in the paper, or is it an issue of writing a check? All the above, don't know. But so that's a simple, I say possible flow chart. It could be tweaked, of course, but the timing is something that we definitely wanted to take into consideration. That if something needed to happen quickly, that our process wouldn't be so cumbersome and bureaucratic that it slows things down and we can't respond in a timely manner. So Justin, Diane, do you have any other comments on this issue, or shall we go to questions?
I think we should go to questions unless Justin has something.
No, I think we're ready for questions, definitely.
Perfect. Okay, so let me get back over here to where I can see everybody. So first question, what do you think? What's your reaction? Don't be shy.
Don't forget to unmute yourself to
Yes.
speak. Thanks.
And question or comment too.
Oh, I think the intention is very good. the intention of this idea committee. Is there anything right now is on the table we need to discuss? Is there any issue already brought up?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. Thank you.
Diane or Justin, are you aware of any? I think Bill has also.
I am not.
I think there's some pending issues, but
Okay.
you know, we'll find out maybe a little bit more.
Bill
Yes,
has a
Bill.
hand up. Go ahead, Bill.
Hi, Marshall. When we say dean and wardens, perhaps most of us are thinking of the dean's warden and the people's warden. However, there's also a bishop's warden. So my question is whether we're talking about 2 or 3 wardens.
Wow, I hadn't considered the bishop's warden. I think, well, open for discussion, but my thinking was just the dean's warden and the people's warden.
I would agree with that because they are the officers of the cathedral. The bishop's
Yes.
warden is not in the, if we're thinking about in part protecting ourselves from any kind of liability, the bishop's warden isn't in that, isn't beyond being a director of the corporation, isn't directly involved.
Thank you. Other thoughts, questions? Come on, people. This is exciting stuff.
Let me fill in a couple of pieces of information. The two issues that Diane mentioned that came, one in April and one in July, I think, they came to me directly from the organization, the outside organizations. And they both had time critical elements to them. One was about a specific bill that was coming up in a couple of weeks. The other was when we finally got the letter they wanted us to sign on to, they said, we want to know by the end of day tomorrow if you're going to endorse this. So sometimes there's a very short timeline, and often I'm the first person that gets the request within the cathedral organization. So we want to make sure, I think, that the policy has enough flexibility. Which committee do I go to fill in all that information? I would like to be able to turn it over to the Peace and Justice Committee. I think that I see that as part of your mandate to research if the wardens and I think it's worth following up on. But I'd like to hear from everyone else about that. Oh, another question. When you say doesn't prohibit or inhibit individuals from making a personal commitment, does that allow us to identify ourselves with St. Paul's Cathedral? I mean, would I just sign it as Penelope Bridges, or would I sign it as the Very Reverend Penny Bridges, Dean of St. Paul's Cathedral? Would that still be a personal commitment?
Excellent question. We had some discussion around that. And Bill, Diane, Justin, chime in. What we are addressing, what we're trying to address here is a situation whereby the cathedral's name as the cathedral is endorsing something. So it's not the individual, it's not the Dean Penny Bridges, it is St. Paul's Cathedral who is endorsing this. By identifying, one argument could be made that by identifying yourself associated with, the question in my mind, and Donna, I see that you're here as well, is whether that then becomes a statement by the cathedral as opposed to a statement by the individual. And I'm not sure which way that needs to go.
I think it's very simple. I think it's very simple. Nothing in our, as a Peace and Justice Committee, can inhibit our clergy or individuals from endorsing an event or activity or policy. And then the question then, to what Dean Bridges said, is how. So if an endorsement or a letter of support goes out on St. Paul's Cathedral letterhead, that is the cathedral endorsement. If a letter goes out from Dean Penny on her personal letterhead as Reverend Penny Bridges or Penny Bridges or anything else, that is a personal endorsement. But if the return address on an endorsement is the cathedral, that is a cathedral endorsement. I think that would be a clear delineation that makes it clear, who is endorsing something and how. And I think that would be the case for any institution. I know my own professional institution, if I endorse something, I send it out on my own head. If I'm endorsing something as, the director of Cal State San Marcos, then it comes out on Cal State letterhead, and that's a very different weight to the endorsement. Would that be fair, Penny?
That would be fair for things that are typed on paper. But, more often what I'll get is, for instance, a petition. Please sign this petition as a faith leader. And you put your name, and they want to know the organization of which you are a faith leader as well. So that would be online. And that's much more common these days.
Donna, do you have any perspective on this from a legal standpoint? And I don't want to get into the weeds on, the legal intricacies.
Right. And I am the one who specifically brought up that question in our back and forth about your initial document. By the way, I really like that. I really appreciate that 5th point also that you added. I think it really rounds out the vision of what you want the procedure to accomplish. And I don't think it's unwieldy, by the way, even though it sounds like it has all these steps. Clergy, wardens, we're going to be very responsive to issues like this. The question about, can the dean act as a dean? I mean, I think we need to work out those lines of representation, because I think she has the ability to be a leader, speaking, that through her discernment, and she's going to lend the authority as this dean, and that can be phrased in a different way than this has been considered by the officers or the chapter. I know it sounds legalistic, but there are different lines of authority, and I think the dean holds a couple of different lines, and it should be clear that she can exercise them differently. We need to make it clear.
Right. Well, obviously a point needing further discussion and consideration to try to remove some of this ambiguity that we're dealing with, and again, not wanting to make this a big, onerous, cumbersome, oh my gosh, you got to go through so many steps. But you're right. There are certain things that in her capacity as the dean, we want to be careful not to hamstring her to the point that she can't, and everything has to go, point of consideration for further development.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So could we hear from people? That's why we're having this forum, is to hear from the 30 people who are interested enough to be here. Hear some input from folks about that.
I also just wanted to go to the comments. Cindy asked a question. She said, first, the process looks pretty clear, but wanted to have a better understanding of the yardstick of that we would use to actually decide. So it's not just sort of clicking off the 5 points. What is the yardstick that the dean and wardens would then use to determine endorsement? And I would leave that to Dean Penny and to answer the yardstick question.
Well, I'm looking for input. That's why I asked for this forum.
Right.
Bill?
It's it's quite common for things of this type. People who, for example, lawyers who have worked for the Justice Department, to cite a current example, sometimes get together and sign petitions. And it's quite common in those situations for people to identify, in the process of signing, for people to identify their positions or affiliations. That's more or less standard practice. And the fact that they do that is not generally understood to commit the organization. And I think that makes sense.
Thank you.
I think what would be interesting, I would like to hear some more feedback from the group as well. What I'm sort of trying to put my head around is that this process seems constraining. It seems designed to get to no rather than to yes, even though the chapter has committed repeatedly to a set of peace and justice principles that bind us as an organization. So I guess I'm curious as to why at the outset we talk about sort of the, protecting the organization and so forth, as opposed to aligning with our mission and following Jesus and standing with justice, which are sort of the foundations of Christianity, as opposed to sort of the way a business would operate or a university or other kinds of organizations. The chapter has committed repeatedly to align the cathedral with a set of peace and justice principles. And I'm just curious if there was any consideration of that kind of mindset in the formation of this policy.
Jeff, that's why you're here, to guide us.
Donna, Marshall, Donna had her hand raised.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'll kind of take a mechanistic point of view, which is I want to avoid the cathedral being a useful idiot for some, and that's a technical term, for some organization that can appeal and make it sound so good sounding, and you start peeling away the layers. Oh, that's not quite what we thought. Also, in my time at the cathedral, I've seen things proposed, with good, like emotional feel-good backing. But it's like when you start taking it apart or seeing what the consequences, as Marshall mentioned, it turns out to be inconsistent with another position we take. So I am for this process because it says, let's do the research. Is there any question about who's behind it? Who's really behind it? What are we being asked for? And to take away some of the emotional blackmail, to put it bluntly. Well, who wouldn't be against gun violence? Let's just get all the cards on the table about this. We're being asked to endorse possibly bills being considered, the hamburger making of legislation. Okay, so who's really behind it? And who does this benefit? Does it benefit the people they're claiming it's going to benefit? Let's just put some oomph behind it rather than say who wouldn't be against gun violence.
I want to get back to, thank you, Donna. I want to get back to Dean Penny's question about the line and hear from people their thoughts as to when the dean should be able to act autonomously versus when this process needs to be employed. Dean Penny, am I correct in summarizing your issue that you want to hear some more conversation on?
That would be very helpful, yes, to have the criteria.
So let's take the few minutes that we have left, about 10, and really talk about or discuss, make recommendations around that line. Autonomous.
I think a shortcut way to kind of get to that and easy in this format and conversation is if anyone here present kind of thinks of an idea that they would not want the dean to act on unilaterally, like what is an example of that? Is it a piece of legislation? Is it an endorsement? Like what sparks your mind of something that you'd say, I'd rather have Dean Penny go through a process before making a decision on her own?
And I just throw in too that Dean Penny, I hope she's going to be here forever at this cathedral. But I think we also need to consider what if there's someone else.
Exactly.
I don't want to sound like a whatever, but I trust her judgment. I'm not so sure I would trust everybody's judgment.
Right. Anita has her hand up. So Anita, unmute yourself and go ahead.
Unmute.
Thank you.
There you go.
I have to agree with Jeff. Some of this sounds very cumbersome, and I have a question and a comment. My question is, what's the average length of time it takes to go through the process?
We don't know yet because it's a brand new process.
Oh, it's a brand new process.
Right. I can speak to the former, to the two that came up this summer. And I think what we did when Dean Penny got those two requests, the gun violence and the other one, I believe we just had since it did not come with a perfect timing around a chapter meeting, we convened a special chapter meeting just for review. Is that my recollection correct? We had a meeting in between meetings to talk about that endorsement, and then we were able to move forward. Is that, Jeff and Denny, is that my memory correct there?
I think actually we did, we waited and had the discussion at the regular May chapter meeting.
Oh.
We, as a general rule with chapter, if I float something by email to chapter and there is unanimous, 100% unanimous consent to something, then we can move forward with it without having a meeting.
I'd like to,
And I think in this case, there were questions. There were, I think Donna raised a couple of questions about, we need to think about this. Who's sponsoring this bill? So we had to punt it to an actual meeting, which
I'd like to make a comment. I have a deep concern about how the police are systematically murdering Black people without consequence. And I mean, we've seen young people especially, protesting in the streets on some of these decisions and some of these actions. And I feel like the church is terribly silent on this issue, terribly silent. And I feel like when people are being murdered in our society and there are no consequences, I think we have to, first of all, address the issue. Second of all, give people some what to do, what you can do, like a list of things, how they can help to alleviate.
Anita, I'm going to interrupt you here for a moment. I think we probably all agree that that's an issue that needs attention, but it's not the focus of today's meeting. The focus on today's meeting is about this process that we want to employ, we want to develop to give us guidance around any number of things. So if we could stick to that.
I'd like to just make a last comment.
Okay.
Then think about different levels. This needs to happen quickly, medium, or it can wait. Thank you.
Yeah, and that would be part of the originating committee, or in the dean's instance, what is the timing of this? Is this tomorrow? Is this a month from now? Is this, whatever it is, that will be taken into consideration. Absolutely. Thank you.
Marshall, Lisa, yes.
To get back to your question, Justin, I'd like to propose that Susan, in my opinion, if an issue is up for a ballot measure, for instance, if it's a ballot measure with different provisions and people supporting it, yes and no, and we've got to vote on it, I think that's something that should go through the process if we're being asked to support it or not.
Thank you.
I'd like to say that I would like to give Dean Penny plenty of freedom to go ahead and lead the congregation and speak on our behalf. I don't believe it's right for me as a member to speak on behalf of a cathedral. I mean, if I have a proposal, I would bring it to the committee and chapter and they should speak. But, we hired Dean Penny and Jeff and the others, to lead us. And I'd like to give them some freedom. I'm thinking about Martin Luther King and those clergy. I mean, their congregations expected them to lead them and to speak on their behalf. And I'd rather err on that side than constraining Dean Penny too much, or Jeff.
Yeah, if it's too complicated for Dean Penny to decide in 10 minutes or so, then talk to the committee. But if it's that simple, then go ahead.
I agree. I mean, and that's what you're here for.
I appreciate the sentiment. And I definitely agree. I would only bring up Diane's point that this is not a policy to hinder Dean Penny or Jeff specifically, but it's a policy meant to provide consistency for the cathedral. We can work in that level of freedom as well, so that we can say that, you know, if the dean, you know, seeks permission or seeks additional resource or whatever, but I think that the idea here is that there is consistency, so that when on the easy, the low-hanging fruit, it's simple. Of course, the cathedral is going to support this issue, whatever it is. But on those nuanced issues or ballot measures or other things, the question is, we don't want parishioners or other members of the community to come and say, why did you support this, but you didn't support X? And we have to have a backing and saying, here's the policy, here's what everything has gone through, and that's why. Otherwise, I think that it could be problematic and divisive if we don't have a policy. We don't want to hinder anyone from speaking on our behalf, and we definitely respect their choices, but also we want to make sure that all those things are informed. Did someone else have their hand up, I think?
I just want to say something quickly because of time.
Yes.
That perhaps we might want to schedule another forum because this subject is very important and we don't have time to resolve it right now. And I think it's important for us and for the Dean Penny to get an answer. Thank you.
Todd had his hand up a moment ago, so let's go to him.
Hey, thank you, Marshall. I really appreciate what Peter said about giving Dean Penny the latitude and the ability to, you know, speak to issues to which she thinks are important. I think today's climate has also become much more complicated and much more evasive. And one of the things I was thinking is, in this process, if there is a, you know, some kind of a summary sheet of the 8, 10, or 12 questions that we need to ask and really be confident about in regards to, you know, who is behind something. As Donna said, you know, as we peel back the layers of the onion, sometimes we find that, you know, something is being promoted that may not be originally presented to us accurately. And so just making sure that the questions are being asked consistently, and that, you know, that would also protect the person making the endorsement, that they weren't led down a wrong path. But I do love the, you know, the freedom and the latitude, but I do think it is important to, you know, ask enough questions to make sure that we can be confident about them. Thank you.
Right, Todd, and to that point, you know, we've identified the 5. Do you think that's insufficient, that more specific and articulated issues need to be made, or what?
Marshall, I would need to reflect back on that screen share.
Yeah.
The 5 I thought were more a process rather than a topic related, but as long as, you know, there are specific and consistent questions that are being asked for each item, then I think that, you know, we're doing our due diligence. And I think Donna would be able to suggest and help us navigate making sure that we're asking focused questions to ensure that we're not being misled in something that we're asked to sign off on.
We're running out of time, but Todd, I think that is an excellent suggestion. And as Dean Penny mentioned, you know, a lot of these requests sort of come as a one-off or an email or a phone call to her. And perhaps part of the process is, you know, thank you for your request. Can you please fill out this form, you know, a brief, you know, bulleted point that asks those questions to everyone, so that is kind of becomes the official request that everyone sees or is on file for everything. And then Dean Penny would have the discretion to say, okay, this needs additional support or additional thought or consideration, or from these 5 answers or however many answers, I have enough information to move forward. And I think that might kind of address people's issues or concerns about you know, stymieing the dean or the clergy from making decisions, but also would provide us kind of the Donna side of the equation of having a consistent format and request on file for everything that comes through. Lastly, I think the other thing that would that could facilitate would be just making sure that people are thoughtful in their requests to the cathedral and that they've done some due diligence and done some work, and not just asking for the for a random show of support.
Okay, we are now technically out of time. I think this has been wonderful. I do want to give everyone the opportunity that if they have further thoughts on this, or if they have questions on this, specifically around this line of unilateral action versus process, because this is what this is intended to do, is to give us guidance. You know, which path do we need to go down? So please, if you have additional thoughts, if you have additional questions, you can send them to me, and I will be happy to share those with the committee and with others for further discussion, because it does sound like this is an issue that we need some further consideration on.
Martha, can I just interject too, that I think there's so much information that people would like to have and share. Maybe we could have something in the e-bulletin from the Peace and Justice Committee, letting people know how we can invite them. For example, your email address or Bill Hammond's email address, or maybe we'll have a Wednesday meeting in the evening to have further discussion, because we can't use the faith forums because they're already,
and with that, we could provide a link to the policy so that people could actually read it. If they weren't able to attend today, or even if you were, you could go back and review it further.
It can all go on the blog.
That'd be excellent.
Let's put it on the blog. Thank you all. Thank you, Peace and Justice Committee. Thank you, everyone, for your feedback. Keep it coming, please.
And remember, just a final reminder, we will not have a forum next week, so we'll see you in 2 weeks with Dr. Grace Chung to talk about what is truth in this election and how do we know what's true and how it's affecting this election cycle. So we'll see you in 2 weeks for the forum. Don't forget to RSVP if you're coming to the in-person Blessing of the Animals next week. And you can do that on our website. And we'll see you soon. Take care.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.